Welcome back to our channel, dedicated to bringing you the deepest, most comprehensive dives into the dramatic world of Genoa City. Today is a fantastic day to unpack the latest corporate warfare, legal entanglements, and shocking betrayals on the young and the restless. Grab your favorite beverage, settle in, and let us explore the monumental twists that are about to change everything. The atmosphere inside the sprawling, glass-enclosed executive suite of Newman Enterprises was thick with an unsettling mix of triumph and impending doom. Phyllis Summers, a woman who had spent her entire adult life fighting tooth and nail for every ounce of power and respect she possessed, stood completely alone in the center of the room. The towering windows behind her offered a panoramic, godlike view of the Genoa City skyline, a visual representation of the corporate summit she had fought so ruthlessly to conquer. She was entirely fixated on a massive, grandiose portrait of herself that had been erected in the office. A testament to her monumental ego and her unyielding belief that she had finally outsmarted the legendary Victor Newman. In the quiet solitude of the executive suite, Phyllis began to speak aloud to her own painted likeness, delivering a passionate, theatrical monologue about her resilience, her unparalleled brilliance, and the sheer, intoxicating satisfaction of watching the great Victor Newman finally meet his match in a woman he had underestimated for decades. However, the sweet taste of her solitary victory was destined to be fleeting, shattered in an instant by the sudden, heavy thud of the polished mahogany door swinging open. The triumphant silence that had enveloped the room was violently punctured as the imposing, legendary figure of Victor Newman crossed the threshold. He was flanked by his fiercely loyal and equally ruthless daughter, Victoria Newman. Victor's bespoke suit was immaculate, his posture unyielding, and his presence radiated an absolute, terrifying authority that instantly sucked the oxygen out of the massive room. There was a cold, calculated smirk playing on his lips, the unmistakable expression of a predator who had finally cornered his prey after a long, exhausting hunt. Victoria walked beside him with the icy, detached elegance of an executioner. Her tailored business attire serving as modern armor for the psychological warfare they were about to inflict upon the woman who had dared to steal their family legacy. The sheer audacity of the intrusion immediately forced Phyllis to drop her triumphant facade and adopt the defensive, combative posture of a cornered fighter. Before she could even demand that they leave her private sanctuary, Victoria's voice sliced through the tension, dripping with condescension and aristocratic mockery. She openly laughed at the absurd, pathetic sight of Phyllis delivering a villainous monologue to a giant painting of her own face. Victoria pointed out the sheer narcissism of the act, using the moment to psychologically diminish Phyllis, reducing the formidable CEO to the status of a delusional interloper playing dress-up in a corporate kingdom that would never truly belong to her. Phyllis's eyes narrowed, her heart rate accelerating as the adrenaline flooded her system. She fired back with her trademark venom, threatening to have security physically drag the Newmans out of the building, boldly declaring that they had no power in her domain and that their intimidation tactics were nothing more than the desperate thrashings of a defeated dynasty. Victor Newman, however, did not even flinch at her threats. He moved with a slow, deliberate grace, leaning heavily on his cane as he approached her desk, his dark eyes locking onto hers with a chilling, absolute certainty. He calmly informed Phyllis that they were not there to trade petty insults, nor were they there to negotiate. They had arrived to present her with a reality she could no longer escape, an airtight, inescapable trap that had been meticulously constructed in the shadows while she was busy celebrating her hollow victory. With a subtle nod from her father, Victoria stepped forward and unceremoniously dropped the thick, heavy manila folder onto the polished surface of the desk, the physical manifestation of the digital destruction they were about to unleash. Victor's voice dropped to a low, dangerous rumble as he advised Phyllis to listen very carefully, reminding her of the absolute folly of believing she could ever permanently outmaneuver the founder of Newman Enterprises. The contents of the folder, and the digital files that accompanied them, were nothing short of a technological nightmare. Victor, a man who had built his empire on traditional ruthlessness, had seamlessly adapted to the modern era, utilizing a state-of-the-art, highly classified artificial intelligence program to orchestrate Phyllis's downfall. He explained, with a terrifying lack of emotion, that this AI had been fed thousands of hours of Phyllis's voice recordings, analyzed her distinct vocabulary, her unique syntax, her email keystrokes, and her precise behavioral patterns. The machine had then been weaponized to fabricate a flawless, entirely manufactured alternate reality. The evidence contained within the folders included perfectly forged emails detailing illegal corporate espionage, manipulated audio files of Phyllis seemingly ordering illicit wire transfers, and a mountain of fabricated digital footprints that painted her as a mastermind of federal corporate crimes. The sheer scale and perfection of the technological deception were staggering, designed not merely to embarrass her, but to completely obliterate her life. Phyllis stared at the documents, her sharp mind racing to process the catastrophic implications of what she was looking at. Her initial reaction was a desperate, scoffing dismissal, a frantic attempt to invalidate the nightmare unfolding before her eyes. She picked up the papers, her hands trembling slightly despite her best efforts to maintain a facade of absolute control, and threw them back onto the desk. "All right, this looks fake," she declared, her voice laced with a bravado she did not truly feel. She argued that any competent forensic digital analyst would eventually be able to tear the AI forgery apart, that the truth would inevitably surface, and that a jury would see right through Victor's desperate, technologically advanced smear campaign. She clung to the concept of objective truth, believing that her actual innocence in these specific fabricated crimes would be her ultimate shield against the Newman machine. It was in that precise moment of desperate defiance that Victoria delivered the psychological kill shot. The revelation that would shift the situation from a manageable corporate dispute to a terrifying, existential crisis. Victoria stepped closer, her eyes completely devoid of sympathy, and delivered a chilling counter-argument. It absolutely did not matter if the evidence was fake, so long as it looked convincingly real to the specific person who would be evaluating it. The truth, Victoria coldly explained, was an irrelevant concept in the theater of the courtroom. The only thing that mattered was the narrative. And the Newmans had just purchased the perfect storyteller. With a twisted, victorious smile, Victoria dropped the ultimate bombshell, revealing the identity of the individual who would be receiving this flawless, AI-generated evidence. She informed a suddenly paralyzed Phyllis that the political landscape of Genoa City had just experienced a massive, unseen shift, and that Christine Williams Romalotti had officially returned to power as the new district attorney. The mere mention of the name Christine struck Phyllis like a physical blow to the chest, instantly draining the color from her face and replacing her fiery defiance with a cold, suffocating dread. The history between Phyllis Summers and Christine Blair Romalotti was not merely a rivalry. It was a decades-long, deeply toxic, and profoundly violent blood feud that had shaped the darkest chapters of both their lives. Phyllis's mind immediately flashed back to the years of bitter hatred, the endless battles over Danny Romalotti, the vicious insults, and the ultimate, unforgivable sin. The night Phyllis had ruthlessly run down Christine and Paul Williams with a rented car, a crime she had miraculously managed to escape serving a hard time for. Christine had spent her entire adult life harboring a deep, righteous, and unyielding hatred for the woman she referred to as a monster. The psychological horror of the situation suddenly became agonizingly clear to Phyllis. Victor had not just created fake evidence, he had perfectly calculated the human element of his trap. Victoria leaned in, twisting the knife deeper into Phyllis's psyche, explaining exactly why Christine's appointment was the final nail in the coffin. She pointed out that Christine, the bug, would be absolutely thrilled to finally have the opportunity to prosecute Red to the fullest extent of the law. Christine would not look at the AI-generated emails and audio files with the objective, skeptical eye of an impartial prosecutor. She would look at them through the lens of decades of unresolved trauma and bitter hatred. Christine would see exactly what she desperately wanted to see, undeniable proof that Phyllis Summers was the irredeemable criminal she had always believed her to be. The district attorney would not question the flawless forgery, she would eagerly champion it, utilizing the full, devastating weight of the state's resources to ensure that Phyllis was indicted, convicted, and locked away in a federal penitentiary for the rest of her natural life. The perfect storm of technological fabrication and historical bias had been meticulously engineered to leave Phyllis with absolutely zero chance of survival. The realization of the sheer, breathtaking cruelty of the Newman plan ignited a volcanic, explosive rage within Phyllis. The fear momentarily receded, replaced by a blinding, righteous fury at the staggering hypocrisy standing before her in bespoke suits and tailored dresses. Phyllis's voice rose to a shout as she pointed a trembling finger at Victor and Victoria, calling them exactly what they were: the most arrogant, morally bankrupt hypocrites to ever walk the earth. She refused to go down quietly, launching into a blistering, passionate tirade that dragged the darkest, most shameful secrets of the Newman family into the harsh light of day. She demanded to know how they could possibly stand in her office and act as the arbiters of corporate morality when their own legacy was built on a foundation of theft, manipulation, and outright violence. Phyllis viciously reminded them of the Cain Ashby situation, her words dripping with absolute disgust. She recounted the ruthless, cold-blooded manner in which Victor and Victoria had conspired to steal a company right out from under Cain, utilizing illegal tactics, corporate espionage, and sheer financial terrorism to rob a man of his livelihood without a single ounce of remorse. She painted a vivid picture of the Newman methodology, highlighting how they routinely destroyed the lives of innocent people simply because they had the power and the wealth to avoid the consequences. How dare they, she screamed, use fabricated evidence to accuse her of corporate crimes when they had openly committed identical, and often worse, offenses in the pursuit of their own endless greed. The sheer audacity of their moral posturing was sickening to her, and she refused to let them pretend they were anything other than ruthless predators. But Phyllis did not stop at corporate theft. She pushed the confrontation into the realm of violent, unforgivable criminality. She brought up the horrific, traumatic ordeal of Jack Abbott, her voice cracking with a mixture of anger and historical pain. She threw Victor's darkest sins directly into his face, reminding him of the time he had orchestrated the kidnapping of Jack, a man who was supposed to be a respected rival, and had him forcibly drugged and replaced with a dangerous doppelganger. She detailed the extreme, terrifying lengths Victor had gone to, the sheer sociopathic disregard for human life and sanity he had displayed in his obsessive quest to destroy the Abbott family. Phyllis painted herself as a survivor, a woman who had certainly made mistakes, but who had never stooped to the level of systematic, institutionalized torture that Victor Newman employed as a standard business practice. She demanded to know how a man who had kidnapped and drugged his enemies could possibly threaten her with a clear conscience. Victor Newman absorbed her blistering, furious accusations with the cold, stoic indifference of a stone monument. Not a single muscle in his jaw twitched, not a flicker of guilt or remorse crossed his dark, penetrating eyes. To Victor, the concepts of hypocrisy and morality were entirely irrelevant in the context of corporate warfare and family legacy. He did not view his past actions against Kane Ashby or Jack Abbott as crimes. He viewed them as necessary, strategic maneuvers executed by a king protecting his kingdom. He looked at Phyllis not as a victim of his ruthlessness, but as a minor, irritating obstacle that had finally been neutralized. The reality of Genoa City, Victor silently communicated through his unwavering stare, was that power dictated morality, and he possessed all the power. His complete, terrifying lack of remorse only served to highlight the inescapable nature of the trap he had sprung. He would not be swayed by emotional appeals, historical guilt, or accusations of hypocrisy. As Phyllis's fiery tirade began to lose its momentum, crashing against the impenetrable wall of Victor's absolute indifference, the Newman patriarch calmly initiated the second, and perhaps most devastating, phase of his master plan. He raised a hand, silencing her, and revealed that the technological forgery of the AI program was only half of the battle. Victor understood better than anyone that digital evidence, no matter how flawless, could sometimes be challenged by a desperate defense attorney. To ensure that Phyllis had absolutely no avenue of escape, he had introduced the undeniable, devastating element of human betrayal. Victor's voice was smooth, almost conversational, as he explained that he had not just relied on machines to destroy her, he had utilized his vast, limitless financial resources to systematically buy the loyalty of the people she trusted most in the world. Victor revealed, with a chilling sense of satisfaction, that he had successfully bribed a core group of Phyllis's most senior, trusted department heads. He had approached the very men and women who managed the daily operations of the Summers conglomerate, the people who sat in meetings with Phyllis, who executed her orders, and who knew the intimate details of her business. For a price that was undoubtedly astronomical, these department heads had agreed to completely sell their souls and betray their boss. Victor explained that these individuals were fully prepared, and legally bound by their illicit agreements, to take the stand in a court of law, place their hands on a Bible, and swear under oath that Phyllis Summers had explicitly confessed to every single one of the fabricated crimes generated by the AI program. They would provide detailed, corroborating, completely manufactured eyewitness testimony that would perfectly align with the forged digital evidence. The psychological weight of this final revelation was catastrophic. The walls of the executive suite, which had seemed so expansive and empowering just an hour prior, suddenly felt as though they were rapidly closing in, threatening to crush Phyllis into dust. The realization of absolute, total defeat washed over her, a cold, sickening wave of despair that settled deep in her bones. She was not just fighting a machine, she was fighting a perfectly orchestrated conspiracy of perjury. The airtight nature of the trap was breathtaking in its cruelty. The AI provided the undeniable physical proof, the bribed witnesses provided the undeniable human corroboration, and Christine Romalotti provided the vengeful, blinded executioner who would gladly tie the noose. There was no defense strategy, no legal loophole, and no amount of fiery rhetoric that could possibly dismantle a lie that was supported by technology, human testimony, and the full power of the district attorney's office. Having laid out the inescapable architecture of her destruction, Victor Newman finally delivered his cold, calculating ultimatum. He stepped back from the desk, adjusting his suit jacket with a casual elegance that belied the brutality of his words. He informed Phyllis that she had exactly until the end of the business day to make her decision. She could either sign the legal documents officially transferring total and contested ownership of Newman Enterprises back to its rightful founder, or she could prepare herself to be arrested, indicted, and prosecuted by a woman who had spent decades waiting for the opportunity to destroy her. The threat of federal prison hung in the air, a vivid, terrifying imagery of Phyllis losing her freedom, her luxurious lifestyle, her dignity, and most importantly, her ability to protect and be present for her children, Daniel and Summer. Victor made it abundantly clear that if the papers were not signed by the deadline, the evidence would be immediately messaged to Christine. And the wheels of justice would ruthlessly grind Phyllis into oblivion. Without waiting for a response, Victor and Victoria turned their backs on the devastated CEO and walked out of the office. The heavy mahogany doors clicking shut behind them with a sound that echoed like a judge's gavel. The silence that rushed back into the room was no longer triumphant. It was the suffocating, ringing silence of a tomb. Phyllis was left standing alone, the physical toll of the confrontation causing her entire body to tremble. The contrast between her earlier, hubristic monologue and her current, shattered reality was stark and agonizing. She slowly turned her gaze back to the massive portrait of herself, the painting that had once symbolized her ultimate victory. Now, the painted eyes seemed to mock her arrogance, a constant, painful reminder of how spectacularly she had underestimated the absolute. Terrifying lengths Victor Newman would go to in order to protect his family's legacy. The agonizing solitude was eventually broken by the frantic, hurried arrival of Michael Baldwin and Lauren Fenmore Baldwin. They burst into the executive suite, the atmosphere instantly shifting from cold corporate execution to desperate, frantic legal defense. Michael, Victor's longtime legal fixer but also Phyllis's oldest and most fiercely loyal best friend, looked physically ill, his usually sharp, confident demeanor replaced by a profound, unmistakable sense of dread. Lauren was right beside him, her eyes already shining with tears, her presence a testament to the deep, historical bond the three of them shared. They had been briefed on the situation, and the sheer terror radiating from both of them only confirmed the catastrophic reality of Phyllis's predicament. Michael immediately rushed to the desk, his hands flying over the manila folders and the digital tablets, his brilliant, analytical legal mind desperately searching for a single, microscopic flaw in Victor's impenetrable armor. As Michael reviewed the evidence, the silence in the room grew unbearable. Phyllis watched her best friend's face, praying for a glimmer of hope, a smirk of legal defiance, a promise that he could find a loophole and blow Victor's case out of the water. Instead, she watched as the color slowly drained from Michael's face. He read the AI-generated emails, listened to the flawless audio fabrications, and reviewed the sworn affidavits of the bribe department heads. When he finally looked up, his eyes were filled with a devastating, heartbreaking sorrow. He shook his head slowly, the gesture carrying the weight of a death sentence. Michael Baldwin, one of the most brilliant defense attorneys in the state, a man who had pulled off countless legal miracles, was forced to admit total defeat. He told Phyllis, his voice thick with emotion, that the forgery was absolutely flawless. There was no digital footprint of manipulation, the witness statements were perfectly corroborated, and the narrative was entirely airtight. Michael's devastating conclusion stripped away the last, lingering shred of Phyllis's denial. He bluntly informed her that they could not win this case in front of a jury. It was a statistical and legal impossibility. He emphasized that with Christine Romalotti sitting in the district attorney's chair, the prosecution would be relentless, aggressive, and entirely immune to any claims of a Newman conspiracy. Christine would ensure that the trial was a fast, brutal spectacle, and the inevitable guilty verdict would result in a maximum security federal prison sentence. Michael, speaking not as a lawyer, but as a man who loved her deeply, begged Phyllis to swallow her pride. He pleaded with her to look at the reality of the situation, to understand that fighting this battle was tantamount to legal suicide, and that signing the company over was the only possible way to guarantee her physical freedom and her future. Lauren, unable to contain her emotions any longer, stepped forward and grabbed Phyllis's trembling hands, the tears now flowing freely down her cheeks. Lauren's emotional reaction was a visceral counterpoint to Michael's legal analysis. She bypassed the corporate implications and struck directly at Phyllis's heart, focusing entirely on the devastating human cost of a prison sentence. Lauren desperately pleaded with her best friend to think about her children. She painted a heartbreaking picture of Daniel and Summer being forced to watch their mother be led away in handcuffs, the trauma of the trial, the years of separation, and the permanent destruction of their family dynamic. Lauren begged Phyllis to realize that no company, no amount of power, and no corporate victory over Victor Newman was worth sacrificing her relationship with her children and the rest of her natural life behind bars. Phyllis was now faced with the most agonizing, impossible choice of her entire life. On one side was her immense, towering pride, her fierce independence, and her absolute refusal to let Victor Newman win. Surrendering the company meant admitting defeat, allowing the Newmans to crush her spirit, and validating their belief that she was nothing more than a temporary nuisance. It meant giving up the ultimate prize she had fought so hard to claim, but on the other side was the terrifying, undeniable reality of a federal penitentiary. It meant a cage, the loss of her dignity, the destruction of her legacy, and the agonizing separation from Daniel and Summer. The history of her survival instincts, the primal, deep-seated need to protect herself and her offspring, was engaging in a violent, internal war against her massive ego and her burning desire for revenge against the Newman dynasty. The broader implications for Genoa City hung in the balance, a silent testament to the catastrophic collateral damage of Victor Newman's absolute ruthlessness. This was not merely a corporate takeover, it was a brutal, psychological execution designed to send a message to anyone who would ever dare to challenge the Newman Empire. Victor had utilized illegal technology, suborned perjury, and weaponized the justice system, all without a single consequence, proving once again that the rules of society simply did not apply to him. The sheer scale of the corruption required to pull off this trap was staggering, and it highlighted the dark, terrifying reality of the power dynamics that govern the city. If Phyllis fell, the shockwaves would be felt in every boardroom and every household, a chilling reminder that the House of Newman always, inevitably, won. As the clock ticked relentlessly toward the end-of-day deadline, the executive suite felt like a pressure cooker on the verge of a catastrophic explosion. Michael and Lauren stood by, offering their silent, desperate support, watching as their best friend wrestled with her demons. Phyllis Summers, a woman who had survived fires, betrayals, and countless wars, was finally backed into an inescapable corner. Would she sign the papers, swallow her pride, and live to fight another day, or would she allow her hatred for Victor Newman to drive her off a legal cliff into the waiting, vengeful arms of Christine Romalotti? The ultimate test of her character had arrived, and the decision she made in the ensuing hours would permanently alter the trajectory of her life, her family, and the entire landscape of Genoa City.